Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
My name is Cecil Corrigal. I'm from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Canada. I'm glad to be in Mexico. Jeez. He met us at the plane and got us lost in the hotel. He got us to the hotel all right, but then lost us in there. But he's okay. I'm very glad to be here, and as a matter of fact, I'm glad to be anywhere. A very good friend of mine by the name of Jack Sennon is speaking at Dana, Saskatchewan, Canada tonight. Now, you don't know Jack Sennon, and you don't know where Dana, Saskatchewan, Canada is, obviously. That really doesn't matter, but he promised me if I'd mention his name down here, he'd mention mine up there. This Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, it's a great thing, and there's just nothing can destroy it. And we were talking on the way in from the airport, and I was talking to this, and I said the only thing that can destroy Alcoholics Anonymous is ignorance and apathy. Ignorance of what we belong to and straight apathy. And I asked him what he thought of that, and he said he didn't know and he didn't care. So, I'm not so sure whether he's the right guy to have up here or not. But I've been watching the committee since I got here, and I'll tell you what, they've been getting along pretty good, and that's great, because sometimes at deals like this, when you're having a big deal, and this looks like it's going to be a big deal, you know, they get in fights sometimes. The committee does. I know this didn't happen here, but sometimes it happens. And it's nice that committees get along, because it's nice to see everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous and in Al-Anon and Alateen and Ala whatever get along, because that's what we're supposed to do, is get along. And that reminds me of a story. It doesn't really. I intended to tell it all along, but it's a story of a golfer, and I know there's a lot of golfers down here, who was out on the golf course, and he had a very, very bad day. He just had a real bad day. And he was sitting in the clubhouse all by himself. And all of a sudden he said, "Oh, God." And a voice came down and said, "Yeah, what's the trouble?" And he looks up and he said, "Is that you, God?" And God said, "Yeah, that's me. What seems to be the trouble?" He said, "Well, I just can't putt." So he said, "Well, tomorrow when you're out there, you keep your head down and swing the old putter like the pendulum of a clock, and I'm sure everything will be all right." So while he had him on the line, he thought he'd better say some more to him, and he said, "Tell me, God, do they have a golf course up in heaven?" And God says, "Just a second, I'll go and check." And he went away, and he'd come back, and he said, "I got some good news, and I got some bad news." He said, "First of all, for the good news, they got the most beautiful golf course I've ever seen." And the guy said, "Well, what can be the bad news?" And he said, "Your tee-off time is 10 after 8 tomorrow morning." And so it's good to be on good terms with everybody, because we never know when our tee-off time is going to be. And I was speaking at a convention in Amarillo, Texas, and of course it was a big convention, seeing it was in Texas, and thought I'd throw that in. But this guy was going to chair it, and he was almost as smart as this one. And he was sitting, and he was a young guy, and he'd never chaired a banquet before, and this was a big banquet. And he was sitting there on his bed in the morning, and he was making notes about what he was going to do. And his wife, imagine this fella, 6 o'clock in the morning. She said to him, "Honey, if something was to happen to me, would you get married again?" Now, how do you answer that at 6 in the morning? And the guy said, "Well, I guess so, and he went on. He's a young man. He went on doing what he was going to do. And so she said, "Well, will you move her into our house?" He said, "Well, she's got to stay somewhere. She might as well stay. The house all paid for. What about the bedroom?" She said, "Well," he said, "it's a good bedroom. You and I know that. It's been a fine bedroom, served us well." So she said, "What about my jewelry?" He said, "Well, if you don't will it to somebody else, it's okay with me. She might as well have it." And he went on doing what he was doing, getting ready for the night meeting. So she said, "What about my car?" He said, "Well, the car's all paid for. She might as well have it. She's got to have a car." So she said, "What about my golf clubs?" He said, "Oh, no, not your golf clubs." She said, you would marry her, move her into my house, let her sleep in my bed, let her wear my jewelry, let her drive my car. What's wrong with my golf club? He said, she's left-handed. So it doesn't pay sometimes to ask those bad questions, you know. Last night when I was going to come down here, I was told by some fellows from Canada that had been down here that they got caught in a snowstorm a couple of times. And they had a difficult time getting home. And I was thinking, gee whiz, I have to be back for Sunday night, and I wonder what's going to happen. And I'd been to my own meeting, and I couldn't fall asleep. And finally I fell asleep, but I started having some dreams. And first of all, I dreamt that I died and went to heaven. Now, that's not a bad dream. That's a pretty good dream for me. But St. Peter was showing me around, and I looked over, and there was Bill McKinnon. And, God, you should have seen what was on his arm. A horrible-looking, pygmy-type thing, you know. And I had a face on it like a torn boot, you know, and I said, my God, what are you doing? He was a fine person. He was active in Alcoholics Anonymous in the United States. Well, he said, you know, old Bill almost didn't make it, Cease, and that's the penance he's going to have to pay for the next 5,000 years. And then I saw Joe Friday, and he was in a hell of a shape. But what was on his arm was worse than what was on McKinnon's arm. And I said, look, he's a good guy. Why'd you do this? She had a face on her like a festered fig, you know, and pygmy-type thing, just horrible. And he said, well, you know, old Joe almost didn't make it. That's the penance he's going to have to pay. And then I saw old Fritz from Rapid City. And on his arm was Joan Collins. Can't you see old Fritz just whipping around there with Joan Collins? And I said, you know, these other two guys are great guys. Why would they have those horrible things on their arms and you give Fritz Joan Collins? And he said, well, Joan Collins almost didn't make it either. I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about my drinking tonight. I'm going to tell you that I did drink. I didn't drink for a whole long time. I'm not like some of you. I didn't have any stick-to-itiveness. I got stopped when I was 27 years of age. And I didn't drink until I was 16, so I only drank for 11 years. But I got right at it. I didn't fool around. The moment I started to drink, and I just didn't get stopped. I said I never had a drink for 16 years, and I had a slip, and it lasted for 11. But I know now, I think, why I started to drink. I didn't find this out till I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I wanted to be an athlete. I became a pretty good athlete. And I found out in Alcoholics Anonymous, when the doctor's opinion, it says men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. And then it says they are restless, irritable, and discontented. When I was 16 years of age, living on a farm, taking part in sports, went to church, I was a good student in school, but one day I got restless, irritable, and discontented. I'd never had a drink. I didn't like this from my home, I didn't like this from my school, I didn't like this from my church, and so I ran away from discipline. And to show you how swift I was, I ran into the Army to get away from discipline. And I found out all about discipline. And I got into the Army, and I had never drank. To my knowledge, I'd never had a drink of any alcohol of any kind. And that first night I went downtown with the rest of the men, all dressed up in that big uniform, and I had my first drink of beer. And it was just great. All of a sudden, I was what I wanted to be. I was a great conversationalist. Somebody said I didn't like it, something I didn't like, and all of a sudden I got muscles. God, I told them where to hang in. And then we went to a dance, and you should have seen me. I was just Canada's own Fred Astaire, I'll tell you. For the benefit of you young people, he was a good dancer. I took a girl home, and I was, you know, Charles Boyer and Clark Gable, all of those great lovers of those days, and all because of that beer I had, and it was just wonderful. Next morning I woke up on that Army floor where we were staying, and we were billeted, and I was that same scared little guy that had come in and joined the Army who was restless, irritable, and discontented the day before. But every night we'd go downtown and I could be what I wanted to be. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. All the guys were drinking. I was drinking just a little bit more than I should be drinking right off the bat. But I did well in the Army. I got to be an instructor. But I got kicked out when I was 17. I went back home and got a job in an aircraft factory. Did really well in the aircraft factory. Got some responsibility. I know today that I didn't like responsibility. Once again, I became restless, irritable, and discontented, and I ran from that job. I ran back into the Army. Told them I'd never been in before. I was drinking all the time, didn't think there was anything wrong with it. The guys were coming home on leave. I was drinking with them, drinking with the people I was working with, didn't think there was anything wrong with it. And then finally, I got into this Army the second time. I told them I'd never been in before, and this time I was a genius. And I got recommended for my commission. I'd love to stand here and tell you that I was an officer in the Canadian Army, but I got kicked out when I was 18. I didn't take officer's training. And I went back and I got a job in a newspaper in the advertising department. And I did well with that. But once again, I got responsibility. I became restless, irritable, and discontented. And once again, I ran. And I ran into the Navy. I told them that I'd never been in before and I was a real genius. I got recommended for my commission. I went away to officer's training, but I got kicked out of officer's training. I didn't get kicked out of the Navy. I just got kicked out of officer's training. It seems that I told an officer what he could do with his ship. And I've been on the East Coast and the West Coast, and I see those big ships, and really it's a physical impossibility to do with that ship what I told him to do with it. But I didn't get kicked out of the Navy. I just got kicked out of officer's training. I had got married when I was 19. And I'd love to stand here and tell you that I was a good husband and a good father, but I wasn't. I was an alcoholic husband and father, and I'm still married to that same gal. Her name is Babe. I call her my current wife just to keep her in shape. And I became a gunner in a merchant ship, and I sailed all over the world, and I drank all over the world. Didn't think there was anything wrong with it because other people were drinking, the rest of the Navy was drinking. I sailed with a lot of your people down the South Pacific, New Zealand, Australia, up in the islands. As a matter of fact, you people owe me a great debt of gratitude because one of your ships got torpedoed down up and coming back from New Guinea, or going up to New Guinea, and they towed it back to Australia. And we were in Melbourne, Australia. Our ship was empty. The government ordered us to take your tanks up to New Guinea, not your drinking tanks, but the tanks that they used in the fighting with the Japs. And so we took them up. We took them in, and those Japs were very narrow about us coming in, but we took your tanks in, and we were coming back out and back to Melbourne, Australia, and everything was going well until our own aircraft came out to meet us. And we'd taken a cargo of whiskey down to Australia, and we'd stolen a lot of it, and we were all drinking. And suddenly, our own planes come out to meet us. Our officers thought that it was the Japanese planes coming back, and they told us to start shooting. And I was in charge of this big forward gun right down here, and the captain's up where I am right now. And suddenly he realized that we were shooting at our own planes. And he become real panicky. I don't know why. We weren't hitting him, but he got all excited. And you have to visualize. I'm in charge of this forward gun, and he screamed down at me, "Cease fire!" So I fired. Hell, I almost became a Japanese ace. But kept the war going for a little extra time. But I came back from the Navy. I got discharged from the Navy, went back home, didn't think there was anything wrong with me. I got jobs. I started losing jobs, started getting jobs, getting fired, and drinking all the time. We had 2 little daughters. I went in business for myself when I was 25. I went in the plumbing and heating business, and I met a friend. My wife had some money, and she gave me the money, and I had a friend that had some experience. And 4 months later, he ended up with the money, and I ended up with the experience. And but that day, I was 25 years old, and my wife took our 2 little girls, and she left because of my drinking. I went down and talked to my partner, and my partner threw me out of the business. It wasn't one of my better days. And that night I went to an AA meeting. I was 25 years old. I didn't phone anybody. I just knew in my hometown. I went back to my hometown. I knew where there was an AA meeting because there was only one group there, and I went there. And there were a lot of older fellas there. I was 25 years old, and at that time there weren't too many people going to AA at 25. And they talked about things that I didn't understand. They talked about jails, and they talked about mental hospitals. They talked about no soles in their shoes and things like that. Because I don't blame them. They didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. It was a brand new group, and they didn't know it. It had just got started. And they were talking about the kind of stuff they drank, and I just didn't identify. And I can remember that night so well. I walked out of that group, and I thought, my God, I don't even belong here. I stopped drinking for a couple of weeks. But I was out on the road. I started selling fur coats out on the road as a traveling salesman. And in a couple of weeks, I started drinking again. And I drank for another couple of years. And during that 2 years, I caused a lot of people a lot of heartache, including myself. I did a lot of gambling when I was in the service. And I kept on gambling when I got home. And I was losing money, and I was having a lot of problems with my gambling. And I tell you that because that's part of the reason that I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I also got to where I was a fighter. The last 2 years of my drinking, I had 17 fights and 17 knockouts, and I lost them all. But I didn't fight in any ring or anything. I just fought in bars and stuff like that because I was arrogant, I didn't like myself, and naturally I didn't like other people, and I was disappointed in what was happening to me. And I was all the time restless, irritable, and discontented. If I was here, I wanted to be there, and when I got there, I wanted to be over here, and it was just like that. That's the way it was. And the last night that I drank, I was in a poker game. It was for a hockey stag. We've always been a great hockey town, and we were having a stag to make some money for the hockey club. And I got in this big poker game, and I did an unforgivable thing. I got caught cheating. It's okay to cheat a little bit, but don't get caught, especially by the guy that caught me. He was about 275 pounds. He was an ex-commando in the Canadian Army, and he and I had a fight. Or I should say he had a fight. He hit me, and I hit the cement floor, and I got up, and he hit me, and I hit the cement floor. We did that a whole bunch of times. And finally, I didn't get up anymore. I just stayed down, not because I didn't want to get up, because I couldn't get up. And they took me to hospital. And I was in hospital for 5 days. And there wasn't one soul in that city came to see me. And I tell that because it shows where I was at that time in that city. And the last day that I was going to be in hospital, my doctor came in, and I'd been in the service with him. Fortunately for me, his partner was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he told me the truth about myself. He told me, Cecil, I can't do anything more for you. I've built you up physically. And he said, the rest is up to you. And I said, well, what do you mean? What do I have to do? And he said, well, when you were in the service, I believe you're alcoholic. And he said, things haven't improved since you arrived home. And he said, I think you should join Alcoholics Anonymous. And he walked away and he left me. But he didn't leave it at that. He went and sent 2 people to see me. I didn't ask to have them come. They just came to see me in hospital. I want you to know they came uninvited. And sometimes, you see people say, well, have they asked for help? I hadn't asked for help. I just talked to a doctor. He went and found a couple of guys that were in Alcoholics Anonymous, and he sent them to see me. And I'll be ever grateful for that little doctor. Because these 2 guys that came to see me, it was a Friday night, just like this. And they walked in. I knew both of them because I come from a city of about 35,000. I had drank with both of them. One guy was the sloppiest drunk in all of Canada, I'm sure. But that night he was dressed up, and he was sober, and he was clean, and he looked good. His shoes were shining. His face was shining. His eyes were shining. And Bill talked to me about Alcoholics Anonymous. The other fellow, his name was Earl. And Earl had been in the penitentiary. He and I had been in the service together, and when we came back from the service, he got in a little trouble over in Edmonton, Alberta, and he got 5 years in the penitentiary for robbery with violence. And Earl found Alcoholics Anonymous in the penitentiary. And I knew something had happened to him. Neither one of those guys didn't have to say a word. I was attracted to Alcoholics Anonymous just by looking at them because I knew something had happened to them. They both talked to me. I tried to change the subject. They wouldn't change the subject. I thought that I was in a private ward that I'd given a bad check for, and I didn't want anybody in that hospital to know that I was in there for drinking. I didn't want them to know I was drinking, but I was drunk when I came in, but I didn't want them to know anything about that. And they made me promise that I would see them the next morning at a meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I promised them that I would. And I shook hands with both of them, made them a promise. And I know why I became an alcoholic. I know today why I became an alcoholic. I became an alcoholic because I'm a Protestant. And don't laugh, you Catholics. I grew up in a Catholic community where there were very, very few Protestants live. And you Catholics treated me bad. And I grew up with resentments against Catholics. They did bad things to me. They called the bingos in Latin so I couldn't understand them. And they just give me a bad time. And here I am in a Catholic hospital with a bad check. And this little nun wouldn't let me out of hospital until such time as I pay that bad check. And so I phoned the only person in the world that my credit was any good with, and that was my bootlegger. And he came and got me out of hospital. He was a taxi driver, and he came and got me out and paid my check. And probably had he known what I was going to do, he would have left me there. Because I've never had to give him any business since that day. He drove me down to a restaurant where I promised to meet these people. And I wish you could have seen me. I've always liked nice clothes. Today I still like nice clothes, but today I pay for them. But that morning I was all covered with blood in my shirt, and my shirt was torn, and my jacket was torn from this fight I'd had. And I go into this restaurant, and there was only one group in our city at that time, and there were 15 members in the group, and they all came. At that time, when they got a live one, they all came. And I knew every one of them. I had drank with every one of them. But I hadn't seen them for some time. I guess I just hadn't been going the same places they were. And we had a meeting. They had what they called an emergency meeting. And I liked every one of them because I just liked what they said. And they didn't look at the fact that I had blood on my shirt was torn. They didn't say anything about that. They just accepted me. And they gave me something that morning that I'd been looking for all my life, I guess, and that was acceptance. And then the couple of them said, well, we'll take you home. And I said, no, I can get home by myself. Because I didn't want them to take me home because that little wife of mine was always a little upset if I was away for 4 or 5 days, and I'd done that before. And I figured that she'd put the run on them and I'd lose these friends. And I said, no, I'll go and then I'll meet you tonight for that meeting. And no, they said they would come up and take me home. Fortunately for me, at that time there wasn't any Al-Anon in Prince Albert, but the women, there weren't any AA gals in the group, but the ladies, the wives of the members, they went to a mixed meeting one night a week. And some of those gals had gone up to see my wife to tell her what I was going to try to do. And I can remember going in that house on that Saturday morning. It was cold, and I was scared of what Babe was going to say. And I had this, you know how some of you guys know how I felt. And I walked in, and my wife opened the door and gave me a big kiss and said, I think everything is going to be okay, hon. That kept me in Alcoholics Anonymous for that day, because that's not the way she usually acted. And I was very grateful. They picked us up that night to go to a meeting, and we went to a meeting on Saturday night. It was a mixed meeting. And I can remember, oh God, there was a bunch of old people there. Some of them were 45, 50 years old. And just horrible. And I thought I was 27, and I'm thinking, my God, what am I doing here? I was January the 16th, 1952. because of you beautiful people, because of Alcoholics Anonymous, because of a power greater than myself that I prefer to call God, I have never had to have a drink since that day. And I don't know whether or not that impresses you, but it sure impresses me, because they were writing book on me and that I wouldn't make it over Christmas, and that was in January. But I got there to that meeting, and I didn't want to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I had no idea when I was in that hospital about going to Alcoholics Anonymous. Those two guys came to see me. I made them a promise that I'd meet them in that restaurant, and I met them. And I liked what I found. And then I went to that meeting. And I can remember a guy by the name of Bobby Motherwell. He's now gone to that great Roundup, and Bobby put his arms around me. And Bobby was a well-dressed man, and he always drove a nice automobile. And I always respected Bobby. And here he was sober, and he looked good. And Bobby was one of those guys that was always making the coffee and doing what you're supposed to do in a group, and he was roaming around, and he said, "See, not only do we want you here, but we need you, and we love you." I didn't think anybody wanted me, I didn't think anybody needed me, and I didn't think that anybody loved me. Bobby said something else to me that night that I'll never forget, and I'm grateful for it. He said, "Cecil, we have 2 meetings a week here." And he says, "What I want you to do is make a decision that you're going to go to 2 meetings a week." And I made that decision that night that I was going to go to 2 meetings a week. And I've never stopped going. And if any of you people are having difficulties with making a decision each meeting, whether you're going or not, I would suggest you just say, well, you're going to go to so many meetings a week and make that decision and go, and there's no more problems. You don't have that tough decision to make every Tuesday night and Thursday night like I would have. I just go to the meeting because I made that decision. I have never stopped going. And as I said, I didn't want to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was 27 years old. I thought I was too young to be an alcoholic. I knew there was something wrong with me. But those people, they accepted me and they made me feel good. They made me feel that I belonged. And I think that that is the problem in Alcoholics Anonymous today. I think that, you know what, I really think there's more people leaving Alcoholics Anonymous than there's coming in. I want you to think about that for a while. They're coming in so fast from treatment centers, from jails, from wherever, and we're not looking after them. They just get in here and we don't treat them and make them feel comfortable, and we're all to blame. And I believe probably you're having the same problem maybe in Al-Anon and Alateen. We're not giving them that good treatment. Just tonight, I'll bet you there's some people in here that aren't too happy about being here. They maybe got a football in their stomach. Let's every one of us here tonight, before we go home, make sure that everybody feels comfortable, the way they made me feel that night. Because I'm sure that if they hadn't made me feel comfortable, if they hadn't made me feel wanted, I doubt very much if I would have stayed. But it was the fact that they made me feel so good. For you see, as I said, I didn't want to go to AA. I had no intention of going to AA. But here I am in Alcoholics Anonymous with a bunch of old geezers, and they're making me feel good. And that's great. I was something like the 3 alcoholic rabbits. I don't know whether you have alcoholic rabbits down here or not. I'm in the fur business, and we got them back home. I don't mean ordinary Saturday night drunk rabbits. I mean real, genuine alcoholic rabbits who sit out by the fence with their ears drooping down. And there were 3 of them. And they were called Foot and Foot, Foot, and Foot, Foot, Foot. And Foot, Foot used to phone him Foot, 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 and he'd say, let's pick up old Foot and we'll go down to the bar. So Foot, 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 and Foot, Foot, they'd pick up old Foot, they'd go down to the bar. And one night Foot, Foot was sitting talking to Foot, 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 and Foot, Foot, Foot said to Foot, Foot, he says, where's Foot? And Foot, Foot said to Foot, 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 he said, well, here just a minute ago, he went outside. So Foot, 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 and Foot, Foot, they went outside, found poor old Foot, Foot was dead. So Foot, Foot said to Foot, 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 what do you think we should do with Foot? And Foot, Foot, Foot said to Foot, Foot, he said, well, I think we should take him to the funeral home. After the funeral, Foot, Foot said to Foot, 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 what do you think old Foot died from? And Foot, Foot, Foot said to Foot, Foot, he said, well, I think he was alcoholic. And Foot, Foot said to Foot, 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 he said, well, do you think we're alcoholics? And Foot, Foot, Foot said to Foot, Foot, he said, well, we're drinking quite a bit. So Foot, Foot said to Foot, 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 he said, do you think we should join Alcoholics Anonymous? And Foot, Foot, Foot said to Foot, Foot, might as well. He said, we got 1 foot in the grave anyway. You know. And that's what I was like. I thought you had to have one foot in the grave before you got here. But those people made me feel so comfortable that I stayed. And I'll be ever grateful to those people. And I stayed sober just by pats on the back. I was the youngest member in the Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. I was probably the youngest member in all of Saskatchewan. And they patted me on the back and they say, "You're doing a good job, kid, and boy, you're great to have you here." And oh my God, it was what I'd been looking for all of my life. And then a horrible thing happened. Some younger members came in. And they walked right by me, went and talked to those older members. And the older members walked by me, went and talked to those newer members. And all of a sudden, I became a middle member. And I don't care whether you're an Al-Anon, Alateen, or Alcoholics Anonymous. One day, you're going to become a middle member. And it's bad. It's a real bad thing to happen. All of a sudden, you're just like a hole in a donut. You're nothing. Just stand there, people walk by you, standing there, you're a middle member. And I thought maybe I should go out and start doing what I used to do and come back in and get some of the treatment that I did when I was first come in. But then I didn't have to do that. Because we had a guy in our group by the name of Ernie Sear. Ernie's now gone to that great Roundup too. And we asked Ernie to chair our meetings. We have discussion meetings where I come from. And Ernie said he would chair the meeting providing we did one thing. And we said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, I want to go through the steps. I don't want to just talk about the steps." He says, "I want to do the steps as a group." So we thought we'd, humor old Ernie, so we said, okay. So we went to that first meeting, and Ernie took that big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he said, "I want you to go home, and I want you to read the first 58 pages. And that's what we did. We went home, and we were phoning each other, "How you doing with your reading?" And we got through the first 58 pages. We went down to the first meeting, and then Ernie showed us in those first 58 pages where step one was, where we admitted we're powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. I didn't even know there was a second part to that first step. They used to read it, but didn't mean anything to me. And Ernie explained about our unmanageability of our lives. And he showed it to us. Where there is a solution, and where in Bill's story, he showed us where we have an unmanageable life. I had an unmanageable life as far as money is concerned. Now, I know none of you people even know what I'm talking about. But back in Canada, but someday you may sponsor somebody that have financial problems. And you tell them, "By God, we heard a speaker from Canada. He had that too." And you tell them what happened to me. And I was bad with money. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous owing $6,200. Now, that's not a lot of money. Some of you people probably got that in your hip pocket. But that's a lot of money in 1952. If you were to put it into inflationary terms, it's probably $35,000 today. And I didn't owe it for anything. I just owed it. Now, I came here by way of a poker game. And I owed it to some strange people. And I had a good job, and this guy I was working for, he got sick and tired of him getting phone calls and me getting phone calls, and he took me to the bank. He made me give him a list of everybody I owed money to, and he and the bank manager, he endorsed my note for $6,200, and he and the bank manager wrote the checks out, and they sent them away. They didn't even let me do that. And they made Babe and I sign a paper that we would pay cash for everything. We would never charge anything. 3 years later, he bailed me out for $7,500 because I had an unmanageable life as far as money is concerned. And then I found out that financial problems got nothing to do with money. Got a lot to do with big shotism. Got a lot to do with pride. Got a lot to do with ego. I was the kind of a guy, you see, if I owed you $400, I had too much pride to say I can only pay you $40 this month. I had to go and pull out the bankroll and say, "There's the lousy $400 I owe you." I begged you for it to get it, but I threw it back at you. And so I had this problem. And I'll tell you, it's a bad problem, because I can remember then Al-Anon started in Prince Albert. And Babe went to Al-Anon. And you know what that would do? I went home one day and have lunch, and we're sitting there with our two little girls. And by this time, I had become an eye specialist. I can do this, I know this, I'm better at this, I. I know you've never gone through that, but that might happen too. And Babe said, I thought you said that you paid so-and-so. And the great one said, if I said I paid him, I paid him. And she said, well, why would they phone me and say you haven't paid them? You know what the great member of Alcoholics Anonymous did? This is sober. I became restless, irritable, and discontented. And I threw my food into the sink, broke the plate. My two little girls sitting there wondering what's happened to Daddy. I stood up, ripped the phone off the wall, and said, they'll not be phoning you anymore. And then I went in the front room and pouted. Can you imagine that? A good member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm acting that way. But to show you that I've improved just a little bit, a lot of years ago I owed a manufacturer $10,000. That's not a lot of money in my business because I'm in the fur coat business. But it's a lot of money in the middle of July when it's about 90 a buck. And this manufacturer was phoning me, writing me, and giving me a bad time, saying bad things to me, and finally I thought, well, I should write him a letter. And I wrote him a letter, and I told him I liked his merchandise, I'd like to have fall dating on it, I'd sold some, I had small deposits, but I couldn't pay him any money because I didn't have any money. And then I threw a little philosophy at him. I said if I had 10 miles to walk down a railroad track, it would take a long time. But if I took it a telephone pole at a time, it would even take longer, but I'd finally get there. I signed it, yours truly, Cecil E. Corrigal, manager of Cecil Corrigal Furs and Fashions. P.S. I'm enclosing a certified check for $100 and sent it away. 4 or 5 days later, I got a letter back. That's when the post office was operating properly. And he congratulated me on my letter writing ability, suggested I get out of the fur business and go writing letters. And he signed it, yours truly, Mo Amsel, Montreal. P.S. Would you mind sending me another telephone pole? And I've sent him a lot of telephone poles, and I could sell him, I owe him money, and I could owe him more money, I could owe him more telephone poles. But I mean, I learned something, that you could send a telephone pole and everything would be all right. And then I went in the next week, we went, and Ernie said, we're going to do step 2, and we're going to do something about it. We're going to study it, and we're going to get it into our lives. And it says, you know, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And Ernie showed us in We Agnostics, out of the big book. And we learned all about that, and all of a sudden I realized, and I said, well, hey fellas, it says restore me to sanity. We had a couple of mental hospitals in our province, and I said, I've never been in either one. So how can I come back from where I've never been? And Ernie and the boys, they said, cease, that's not what we mean. We mean your mental attitude. We mean that you are a negative thinker. And I was. I was the kind of a guy that was real negative. I know that sometimes we're not all like that, but some of us are. You know, we get talking about, you ever see people sitting around in a restaurant, 4 or 5 members of AA or 4 or 5 members of Al-Anon, trying to help somebody that's not there? And they say things like, I heard. They say, everybody says, have you heard? Did you hear? Isn't it awful? People say, did you ever? Somebody said, would you think? Don't say I told you. Oh, I think it's terrible. I was that kind of a guy. I could sit around taking your inventory all day long. Or talking about the conditions of the country or the conditions of the city, anything at all, as long as it was negative. I was something like a negative barber. This guy slid into a barber chair one day and he said, like a haircut lasts me for 3 weeks. The barber said, why 3 weeks? And he said, I'm going on holidays. The barber said, where are you going? He said, first of all, he said, I'm going to London, England. The barber says, you're not going to London, England. He said, I am. He said, you're not. I said, I am. He said, I wouldn't go there if I were you. Now, I've never been there, but I heard. It's a lousy place to go, too many people, too many cars. The guy said, look, it just cut my hair. If I don't like it there, I'm going on over to Paris. The barber says, you're not going to Paris. He said, I am. He said, you're not. I said, I am. He said, I wouldn't go there if I were you. Now, I've never been there. He said, but I heard they really fleece the tourists. The guy said, look, I don't care. If I don't like it there, I'm going to Rome. The barber says, you're not going to Rome. He said, I am. He said, you're not. I said, I am. He said, I wouldn't go there. He said, I understand a lot of Catholics over there. Guy said, I'm a Catholic. And he said, it doesn't matter. I understand. He said, I heard there's a different kind of a Catholic. 3 weeks later, the guy come back, sit in the barber's chair, and the barber said, how was your trip? He said, it was good. He said, it wasn't. He said, it was. He said, you didn't go to London. He said, I did. He said, you did. He said, I did. He said, I'd love to stay there longer, but I wanted to get on to Paris. He said, you didn't go to Paris. He said, I did. He said, you did. He said, I did. And he said, I'd love to stay there longer, but I wanted to get on to Rome. He says, you didn't go to Rome. And he says, I did. He says, you did. He says, I did. He says, as a matter of fact, he said, I got an audience with the Pope. And he says, you didn't. He says, I did. He says, you didn't. And he says, you'll never believe what happened. He says, I knelt down, bent down to kiss the Pope's ring, and you'll never believe what the Pope said. And the barber says, what? And he says, where the heck did you get that lousy haircut? And I was something like the barber. You know, I didn't know, but I heard. And I meet some people, not in the United States, but I meet some people back in Canada. They're like, they say they didn't know, but they heard, you know. And then we went on, the third meeting we went on, and where we had to make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood it. And they asked us to make a decision. And I don't know about you people, but I still have a difficult time making decisions. Even today, I have a difficult time making decisions. And that's all they asked me to do, was make this decision. And I was, you know, at this time, I'm looking for God, and they told me, well, God's not lost, don't worry about that. But they told me, you know, all you have to do is make a decision. And then Ernie took the, you know, where it says God could and would if he was thought, when she read it tonight, underneath that it says we're now at step 3. And then it shows us what our life is like, that we're like the actor that wants to run everything, you know. And they show exactly what our will and our life is like. And Ernie says, do you want to be that way? And I says, no. And he said, well, all we want you to do is make a decision to turn that over to somebody else. And as I say, I don't like making decisions. Before I come up here tonight, I was trying to decide whether I should go to the bathroom or not. And right now, I don't know whether I've made the right decision or not. But I don't know. I don't know whether you people know what a poacher is down here. We have poachers back home where they, you know, they fish out of season, they do hunt ducks, hunt geese, whatever, never have a license. And there was this old poacher, and the game warden couldn't catch him, and a new game warden came to town, and he went down on a Saturday afternoon all dressed up with old clothes on and made friends with this old poacher. And this old poacher, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the old poacher said, well, I'm going fishing. So the game warden said, well, can I go with you? And so the old poacher said, I guess it's okay. So they went out in the boat and get out in the middle of the stream, and the old poacher stops the boat, reaches over into a tin box, gets out 2 sticks of dynamite, lit them, threw them into the drink, and you know what happened? Boom! Up comes the fish, out comes the net, and he fills the old boat with fish, and out comes the bag. And the old poacher, the old game warden said, I finally got you. Those other guys couldn't get you, but I've got you. And the old poacher doesn't bat an eye. He reaches over, he gets 2 more sticks of dynamite, lights them, hands them over to the game warden. And the old game warden's sitting there with 2 lit sticks of dynamite. And the old poacher says, look it, buddy, fish or do you want to talk? He made a decision, I tell you. But you see, the reason we don't want to make a decision is because, you know, we're afraid of making the wrong decision. You know, and we procrastinate. And we have the fear. That's where the fears come in. We're afraid of doing something wrong. And so we don't do it. And then, you know, we procrastinate and we tell people lies. When they phone us up and ask us if we've done it, we have to tell them a lie. They phone the next week and ask if we've done it, we have to tell them another lie, because then we have to remember what we said the week before. And it's a terrible thing with those fears and not making that decision. But we're just afraid we'll make a wrong decision. I have a friend of mine who was over in Ireland. He's walking down the street and a guy stuck a gun in his back. And he said, what are you? And the guy thought real fast, and he thought, well, if I say I'm Catholic and he's Protestant, he's going to shoot me. If I say I'm Protestant and he's Catholic, he's going to shoot me. So he said, I'm Jewish. And the guy with the gun says, I'm the luckiest Arab in the whole wide world. So you see, sometimes we make the wrong decision, you know. But all they asked me to do was make this decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood it. And I did that. I went downstairs, come home from meeting, I went downstairs, and I said, look at God, I've done a lousy job of managing my life. How about you just taking it over? And I just turned it over. And it started to work. And I had to keep it that simple. I can't complicate anything because if I do, I get in trouble. I have a friend of mine back home that has a ranch. Another friend said, how did you get the name of this ranch? And he says, well, I wanted to call it the Bar Q. My wife wanted to call it the Susie Q. My daughter wanted to call it Susie Bar Q, and my son wanted to call it the Bar Susie Q. So we called it the Bar Q, Susie Q, Susie Bar Q, Bar Susie Q. The guy said, well, that's a great name, but where are the cattle? And he said, none of them ever survived the branding, you know. So that can happen to us if we complicate things. It can happen to me very easily. So I keep things simple. And I did that, and the next week I went back to the meeting, and Ernie was a wise old man. Ernie had pencils and paper for every one of us. And he said, somebody said they couldn't find a pencil and a paper to do their 4 steps, so he said, here it is. Gave us all a pencil and paper. People accused him of giving us homework. And that's exactly what he was doing, and I'm ever grateful that he did that. And he gave us this, told us in this book, showed us the chart on page 65, how to do a 4-step, and we went home and we did our 4 steps. And we phoned people, and we phoned our friends in AA, and we said, how are you doing? And none of us wanted to get behind each other, so we all did it. We did it as a group. We went back the next week with our pencils and paper. God, I wanted to show mine to Ernie. And Ernie said, no, see, that's, that thing is personal. But he said, we'll tell you what to do with it. And then we studied the 5th step, and he told us what to do with it. And the next week I went and I took a 5th step. And some people say, well, that's a bunch of Canadian, propaganda that guy's bringing down here. Well, I want you to know something. I bought this book in the United States. And I really appreciate you people sharing it with me. And I'm really grateful that it told me exactly how that I was supposed to do this program. And so I did that 5th step, where it says, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being. And a lot of people say that they admit to another human being. And that's not what it says in the book. It says, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being. And you know what I did in doing that? I went home, got down on my knees, admitted it to God in the bathroom, got up and went to the mirror to admit it to myself. And you know what? I had changed stories from there to there. And I had to do that a couple of times. And so I did it the proper way. I finally got admitted the same story to myself and to God, and then I went and found another human being. Now I know in the United States they tell us that a lot of people do it with their sponsor. That's okay with me. But in that book that I bought in the United States, that's not what it tells me. It tells me that I should find somebody that knows how to do this. I've had the same sponsor for 38 years. I wouldn't take my 5th step with old Elmer. Hell, he might get drunk and go and blab it all over. I just wouldn't do it. I found a minister, Protestant, mind you, and I went to him because that's what it told me to do in the book. And so I went to him and I told him what had happened, what I had written down that 4th step. He taught me how to forgive myself. He showed me many, many things. He brought a lot of things out of me. You see, and that's another thing about doing it with another member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Sometimes they're too soft on us. They'll say, well, that's all right, I did that too. But those guys, an experienced counselor, will not let you off at that. They will bring more things out of you. And I think that, well, it's just what it says in the book. I'm just going by the book. And I went away from that, and the Reverend says, now do you know what to do, Cecil? And it told me in the book exactly what to do. It said I was supposed to take this book down, and I was supposed to read steps 6 and 7. And I took the book down, where it says we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And then where it says we humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings in step 7. And I was never more ready to have God remove all these defects of character than I was that night. But then, I got afraid of becoming too good too fast. Don't worry about that. That'll never happen. I just am privileged to do this on a lot of Friday and Saturday nights all over the country. And I haven't met any saints yet, so we don't have to worry about that. But after a while, I realized that I was trying to remove these things myself. And that's not what it says in the book. It says we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. So once again, I asked God. I didn't want to gamble anymore because I was still gambling. And I was getting in trouble with gambling. And I'll let you in on a little secret. You can lose money sober. Those ponies don't run any differently when you're sober. And so I asked him to remove this obsession, and he did. I don't have to gamble anymore. I can go to the races if I want, but I don't get any charge out of it. I don't buy a whole bunch of tickets. I might buy a $2 ticket or something, but it's no big deal anymore. I can sit down and have a game of cards with people for quarters or something, but it doesn't matter. But I don't make games, and I don't go looking for games. And it kind of bores me, as a matter of fact, to gamble anymore. I used to swear a whole lot. I asked God to help me with my profanity. I don't think that I have any right to swear from this podium. You know, some of you may have brought your mother or your daughter, told them about this great thing we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. And if I was to get up here and cuss and swear, they'd say, well, it's a great thing, you know. And I want to tell you a little story about a fellow back home that was a businessman that was having a lot of trouble with booze. His wife was going to Al-Anon, and one day she was in my store, and I said, I heard your husband went to a meeting, to a different group than what I was going to. And she said, yeah. And she didn't sound too enthusiastic about it, and I said, well, what happened? Did he enjoy it? She said, I don't know. He came home, and she said, I said, how did you like the meeting? And he said, kind of a strange meeting. He said, they prayed a little bit, they swore a whole lot, and they prayed again, and then we had a cup of coffee and went home. I just hope that never ever happens in the group that I belong to. And I'm not a do-gooder. I'm not, you know, a prude that gets upset if somebody swears. That's not the idea of it. But I just feel that as far as I'm concerned, that is one of the things I had to do. And I appreciate that. It says we humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. I found out a little bit about humility. And I was having a difficult time to get down on my knees. And I was in New York, and a fellow by the name of Shy Walker told a story about how he come out of prison, and he was having a difficult time to get down on his knees. And he told how he was wearing high-top boots, and he was working in construction. And he told how he kicked his boots underneath the bed one night. And he told how he got down on his knees to get his boots from under the bed, and he thought, by golly, I'm going to say a few words. And every night he used to boot his boots under the bed so that the next morning he'd have to get down to get them out and say a few words. I don't know whether it works with high-top boots because they didn't have any at that time. But I know it works with ordinary shoes because I tried it. I don't have to boot my boots under the bed anymore. I can pray whenever I want. I'm probably the prayingest member in Alcoholics Anonymous. But I learned that from Shy. And I learned if there's any definition of humility to me, it would be the ability to stand and the willingness to kneel. The ability to stand up for what we believe in, and the willingness to get on our knees and thank God for what we've been given. And I've been given just a whole lot in Alcoholics Anonymous. And you see, step 6 and 7, they are so great, because in step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, we haven't done a whole lot. We've just found out really what's wrong with us. Now in step 6 and 7, are we really ready to do something about it? In the 12 by 12, it says this is the step that separates the men from the boys. We get into the nitty-gritty. We get right there, and you know, alcoholics are great people for not being that bad. You know, we can justify things. I heard a story about a sweet old dignified society lady that went to the doctor, and she told the doctor that she had gas on her stomach. And she said, but it's no problem. She said, it hasn't got any odor and it doesn't make any sound. So he gave her some tablets and told her to come back in a week's time. She come back in a week's time. She says, now it's worse. She said, it still doesn't make any sound, but she said it's got a bad odor. So he says, now that we've done something about your sinuses, take these pills to do something about your hearing. You know, And you see, sometimes we don't want to admit we're that bad. You know, we just go through life like that. Hadn't heard that one before, had you? But in step 6 and 7, it's so important because we review what we've done so far. We review those past 5 proposals. And it says we're building an archway through which we will walk a free man. Every meeting, Ernie used to read those, the 12 promises to us on page 83 and 84. And he said, this is what you're entitled to. He said, don't gyp yourself. And my God, I used to think, boy, oh boy, I wish I could get feeling like Ernie. Unknown to me, Ernie didn't know any more about it than I did. He was also going through the steps. And he was doing them with us. I thought he invented them. No. But I don't care about that anyway. Ernie just showed me and taught me and led me through those steps, and he led the whole group. And we became a strong group, and we became the type of a group that when somebody asked us about a 4th step, we could tell them how to do it. And that's the big thing about doing the steps, because if somebody says, how do I do that? You get the chance to sponsor somebody. You can say, here's how you do it. And you've had that experience. And you can share your experience, strength, and hope with another human being. We went on to step 8 where it says we have to make another list of all the people we'd harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. And I said to Ernie, well, I've already made that list in step 4. And he said, Corrigal, knowing you probably hurt somebody between step 4 and step 8. And I said, yeah, I guess I have. So he said, well, make the list. And I'm glad Ernie was that way, because I don't think I would have done it if somebody hadn't. And I don't think I'd have done it if we hadn't been doing it as a group, because I wanted to keep up with the rest of the gang. And so I wrote the list. And I'd harmed a lot of people. And I became willing to make amends to them all. And when it came that step 9 where it said we made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others, I went about doing what I had to do. And I made those amends. And I found out what Ernie was talking about. I found out what he meant when he read those beautiful promises, where it says if we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we're halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook about life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. That God could and would if He were sought. And I knew what those promises were. And I'll give you an absolute guarantee, if some of you haven't gone through the steps in sequence, that you are entitled to those promises, and every one of them will come true if you do those steps in sequence. And a lot of people talk about going back and doing step 4 and step 5. I have never had to do that, because I found out that we had step 10, 11, and 12. And step 10 said to me that I had to continue to take a personal inventory, and when I was wrong, I had to promptly admit it. And I call those growth steps. I don't call them maintenance steps, because I feel if I was to maintain something of this beautiful building, we would keep it just as it was. Why not make it better than it is? So I like to grow in Alcoholics Anonymous, because a guy said one time, Wesley Parrish, the late Wesley Parrish, used to say, you got to grow or you got to go. And I like to take that word grow and I like to break it down, and I like to take the G for gratitude. Gratitude for everything that's happened to me. Gratitude is not just something you talk about. Gratitude is something you do. I'd like to take the R for responsibility. To be a responsible person. To be responsible in Alcoholics Anonymous. To be responsible in my community. To be responsible in my church. Whatever I'm asked to do, I just want to be a responsible person. And I don't like the word responsibility. I told you that. But I know if I'm grateful enough, I can be responsible. And I like to take the O for open-mindedness. Open-minded enough to listen to anybody that comes to Alcoholics Anonymous no matter how cockeyed they may be. I can listen to them and say, well, just stick around and one day your thinking will change. I take the W for willingness. Willing to be grateful, willing to be responsible, and willing to be open-minded, and willing to be willingly. The greatest of all, willing to be willing to do what you're asked to do. And I think it's the greatest thing that ever came down into my life is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And in that 10th step where it says that we have to continue to take that personal inventory, and when we're wrong, we promptly admit it. And I'd like to share that with you because I was doing these steps and doing them well. I was an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd become a delegate to the General Service Conference. I was Mr. AA in our town. I became Mr. Central Avenue in our town. I was good in business. Everything was going great. But you know, I forgot who I was and what I was and where I came from. And I share this with you because I hope it never happens to you. When I was 10 years sober, I would go to an AA meeting with an attitude something like this, and I'll share it with you. You lucky people, here I am. You know, if somebody wants to get straightened out, I'll spend a couple of minutes with you. That's really sick. I was going to the penitentiary every Tuesday night to handle a group out there. And on my way out, I'd be driving, boy, these guys are really lucky. The great ones coming out here. Aren't they lucky? Boy, isn't that great, eh? One day I was working for the wealthiest man in Prince Albert. And I decided he should be the second wealthiest man. And I got some of those material things. But in my great struggle to get them, I lost some of those spiritual things. And one day he called me into the office, and I was managing the largest ladies' wear store in the province of Saskatchewan. I was looking after the fur departments of 5 stores. And I was big. I had that big car, and I had the expense account, and I was on radio, and I was on television, and boy, I was big, I'll tell you. But it seemed that store wasn't quite big enough for the two of us. And it seemed that he owned it. And it seemed that he wasn't about to leave. And he fired the great Cecil Corrigal. And I walked out of that store with an attitude something like this. They won't last long now. The great one's gone, you know. And I'll tell you, a great thing happened to me. My little cousin came to visit me, and she was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. She came from the west coast of Canada. And I know she just didn't come. I know that she was sent by God. And I put some brand new threads on me, and I was going to a Roundup way up in Flin Flon, Manitoba. And old Dave Murray was going with me, or I was going with him. And I went down to see my little cousin, and I stood up in front of her in my big egotistical way, and I said, well, kid, you know, how do I look? And she said these few simple words. She said, you look real good on the outside, Seats. How are you really on the inside? And I went away to Flin Flon, Manitoba, and old Dave didn't talk because maybe he thought something may be happening to Seats. Now, I wasn't away from Alcoholics Anonymous. I had never missed a meeting. I was doing my penitentiary work, but I had lost that spiritual thing that I had. I went into Winnipeg, Manitoba, spent some time with Tommy and the other Tommy and Ross Marr, who's now gone. I went back and I spent a couple of days in a hotel room just talking to God. I went back to Prince Albert, went in business for myself. That's no big deal. I had to do something. And I went back to Alcoholics Anonymous. I had never been away, but I went back the way I'm supposed to be with the proper attitude and the right motives. And thank God that little gal said that to me. Step 11 said to me, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Every morning I take this book of Alcoholics Anonymous no matter where I am. And I read starts on page 85, step 11, 86, 87, and 88. It tells me exactly how to live my day. I read the prayer on page 63, and I read the prayer on page 76. I read the promises. I read the last part of A Vision for You on page 164. I may read the acceptance part on page 449. Some people say to me, what time do you get up? I call it 7 minutes with God. It doesn't take very long. I have some prayer and meditation. I may read Emmett Fox. I may read Vincent Peale. Sometimes I may read the Bible. I know that's not conference-approved literature, but I try it anyway. And I get prepared to go out in that old world because you never know who's out there to get you. There's always going to be someone aggravate your disease, sometimes before you get out of the house. Those people will say bad things to you that you're living with. And I get ready for it. And I'll tell you, it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me, is to learn how to do that. And I'll tell you why I started. I was going to work one day, and I started to have an argument with a guy that was in Vancouver, the west coast of Canada. I was going to meet him in Montreal at a fur convention. He and I had had an argument on the telephone, and we were going to complete the argument in Montreal. I knew the moment that I saw him. And I started to get ready for the argument. And I started arguing with him, and pretty soon I'm arguing out loud. I'm driving to my store. And, you know, you come to a stop sign. Prince Albert's not a big place. Everybody knows everybody else. I'd be sitting at a stop sign just giving it to this guy. People would look over, you know, wonder what's wrong with old Cease this morning. Who's he talking to, you know? And I got to my store, and I wasn't finished the argument. And I drove around the block a couple of more times to tell this guy what I wanted to tell him. And I got to my store at 8:45 in the morning, completely exhausted, arguing with somebody that wasn't there. I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to argue with people that aren't there. I don't have to argue with anybody, because step 11 tells me how to handle my day. You know, it's a must for me, because I just don't want to get in trouble when I get out in that cruel old world. And I want to tell you a story about another poacher. And he was the same as the last poacher. He was doing everything he shouldn't do. And there was a game warden by the name of Ralph. And old Ralph tried for 5 years to catch his old poacher, and he couldn't catch him. And one night he went down and he bedded out down in front of the old poacher's shack, and he thought, well, I'll catch him when he comes out in the morning, because sure as heck he'll do something wrong. 4 o'clock in the morning he come out. The door creaked open, you know, and the old poacher's laying in the hay frozen, and he thought, well, I'm going to get him. And the old poacher put his head around the door, and he says, do you want some breakfast, Ralph? And old Ralph, he got up, and he come in, and he's having breakfast, and he said to the old poacher, how did you know I was out there? And he says, I didn't, but every morning for the past 5 years, I've opened that door and said, you want some breakfast, Ralph? You know, you see, you got to be ready. And I want to share something with you that happened one morning when I was doing my reading. I told you we had 2 daughters, and those daughters grew up. Our oldest daughter, we gave her everything, education and love and material things, and you'll never believe what she did. She married a Catholic. An Italian one. They're the worst kind. And she was living in Eastern Canada, and I was coming from speaking or somewhere, and I went to see them, and she had a little girl at that time. Her name is Anna Maria. Really not an Anglo-Saxon name. And little Anna Maria is 3 years old, and she's all ready to come home with Grandpa. She has her suitcase packed, and so I bought her a ticket, and she came home with me. The first morning she's there, I'm doing my reading, and she knocks at the door. And Babe says, you can't go in there, honey, Gramps is doing his reading. So I said, let her come in. No, she said she had something to tell me, so I said, let her come in. And she came in, I took her up on my knee, and I said, what have you got to tell me, honey? I explained to her what I was doing, and she said, well, I wanted to tell you that I love you. And I said, I love you too. That may not mean anything to anybody out there. But here is this old hard rock that came to Alcoholics Anonymous, 27 years old, unable to give love, unable to accept it. And here I am telling this little Catholic girl that I love her, and she's telling me that she loves me. And we still do that today, and she's 19 years old. She has a little sister who's 16, but when she first came along, they called her Chella Louisa. I don't know where to get the name. And Chella Louisa is my buddy. Grandpa knows everything. She get in an argument with her mother and she'll say, Grandpa said it was this way. And that's it, you know. And her and I just love each other, and I stick up for her and she sticks up for me, and we're just buddies. My youngest daughter has a little fellow by the name of Jason. He's 16 years old now. Many of you people have met him. He was to New Orleans with me. He was to Montreal with me. He's Protestant. He comes on a lot of trips. And he's just a great kid. He's going away on a cruise, and he's in the Sea Cadets, and he's going away on a 2-month cruise at the end of this month. And he's my pal. And he goes to a Catholic school. They just never stop, I'll tell you. And I want to share with you what he told me. The reason he said, Grandpa, do you know why I'm going to go to the Catholic school? And I said, why? And he said, well, they have a better spiritual program there. Something that you and I always talked about. Just imagine that. And I accepted that. You know, Alcoholics Anonymous is so great, where it says keep an open mind and live and let live and all those things. You learn about them. And Jason is going there, and he's doing good. He's doing great. Jason's mother got divorced from her Protestant husband, and she too married a Catholic. Another Italian one. And now they have a little guy. He's 6 years old. And his name is Giovanni Anthony. And I don't know how to spell it. I just learned how to pronounce it. I just call him Gio. And he is really my pal. And he looks in the books, and he and I do a lot of reading to him, and he looks in a book where he sees a bottle of whiskey, and he'll say, Bapacis and Gio, no way. Sees cigarettes, Bapacis and Gio, no way. But he went down east to a wedding, an Italian wedding, and when he came home, Donna says, tell Bapacis what you drank at the wedding. And he changed the subject. So then Tony says, go ahead, tell Bapacis what you drank at the wedding. And he said, well, I just had a little bit of wine. So we went in the other room, and he said, well, Daddy said it's okay if I have wine as long as I don't have that other stuff. I said, well, it's up to you. I said, you know, Bapacis doesn't have any wine. Okay, he said, Bapacis and Gio, no way. That's the only slip he's had, just a little bit. And he's okay. He's doing well. And he and I, we just spend a lot of time together. And I could have lost all of that. I could have lost that in Alcoholics Anonymous. And you know, every one of my grandchildren, we've prayed together. The Catholic ones have wanted me to say the Hail Marys, but I said, no, I'm not ready for that. But we say make our prayers. And that little Gio, you know, I taught them a prayer that my grandmother taught me. And that prayer is, please God, treat me tomorrow like I've treated everybody today. Better be careful if you use that one. Please God, treat me tomorrow as I've treated everybody today. And little Gio, he went home. When he stays with about once a week, and we say our prayers. And he went home and he made his daddy say his prayers with him. And Tony came down to my store and he said, what's this prayer that you say at the end of your prayer about treating somebody? And he's trying to teach Tony that prayer about, you know, please God, treat me tomorrow as I've treated everybody today. But isn't that fantastic? Where we pray together. And you know, the whole four of them were there, and when they're teenagers and little Gio, and if they're staying at the house, we say our prayers together. All because of Alcoholics Anonymous. All because they know a spiritual life through their own religion, but also because of the conversations that we've had about Alcoholics Anonymous. They all love Alcoholics Anonymous. They all love me because I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think it's just great, and I think I'm a lucky guy. Step 12 said to me, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. A spiritual awakening to me is just personality change. You know, when I got in my car this morning real early, got up real early, I had to drive to Saskatoon, which is about 90 miles away, catch an airplane, fly to Minneapolis, catch another airplane, come here. If I had said to myself while I'm shaving, holy malarkey, I have to go to Saskatoon and catch an airplane and fly to Minneapolis and catch an airplane and fly to Sioux Falls. I'd have been played out before I got out of the bathroom. You know, I said, aren't I a lucky guy? I'm having a shaving and I'm saying, aren't I a lucky guy? Because people invite me. I'm going to see friends. I'm going to be with George and I'm going to be with Tom. And I'm going to see a lot of friends. I'm sure that Fritz is going to be there. And it's just so great. And that's a personality change. Because I'm grateful that people invite me to go places. And then it says we tried to carry the message to the alcoholic and still suffered. I don't think we have to go out and look for people that are still suffering. I guarantee that there's somebody in this room tonight that's suffering. There's probably several people that have got footballs in their stomach. And if you see them and they're not looking too good, put your arm around them and tell them that you want them, you need them, and you love them. Tell them that this is a great thing and tell them a little bit about this thing. Because I think that we should make them feel comfortable, as I said at the beginning of my talk. And then it says, practice these principles in all our affairs. What principles are we talking about? I think in step 1, we're talking about honesty. Step 2, we're talking about hope. Step 3, faith. Step 4, courage. Step 5, integrity. Step 6, willingness. Step 7, humility. Step 8, brotherly love. Step 9, justice. Step 10, perseverance. Step 11, spirituality. And step 12, service. Because we have the greatest opportunity in the world, and that's to serve our fellow man. And we can do that in Alcoholics Anonymous or in Al-Anon or Alateen. I want to thank the committee for giving me this very pleasurable privilege of being with you and kicking your conference off tonight. I want to thank you, the audience, for being such a great audience because you listened and you made it easy for me. Last but not least, I want to thank God for giving me one more beautiful day to do something one more time, what I'm supposed to do in Alcoholics Anonymous, because I never know when my tee-off time is going to be, and I better be ready when it comes. And there's a little town just outside of Omaha, Nebraska. You all know where that is? A little town called Boys Town. And as you drive up to this little town, you see a statue of one little boy carrying another little boy. And you can tell by the way he's stooped over and by the sweat on his brow that he's having a very difficult time. But underneath are simple words, something like this: "No, Lord, he is not heavy, for he is my brother." And that's what I've found in Alcoholics Anonymous. A whole lot of brothers and a whole lot of sisters. And I want to thank you for that. And I want to close this talk the way I close most talks that I ever give. And I hope it helps you as much as it's helped me. Every one of you look real good on the outside tonight. How are you really on the inside? Thank you, and God bless you.